Well, we're going to continue on. We've been talking about following the life of Jesus, and just a quick overview about what we've talked about. We talked about John the Baptist. He shows up at the Jordan. He's baptizing the first time in history, in Jewish history, that this has been done. He's baptizing people, and as John the Baptist baptizes people, you know, he's preparing to lead up to Jesus coming. And then we talked about how he says, "Look, or behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And there was Jesus, and Jesus comes on the scene. And then we talked about Jesus at that point was led away, and he was tempted in the wilderness. That the Spirit of God led him into the wilderness to be tempted, and he faced the temptations that the enemy brought against him. And we talked about how his whole ministry on earth there was a constant temptation from the enemy of questioning what his mission was. And it's a lot like what we deal with. I mean, we discover our purpose in life, and then the enemy comes in and he's like, "Is that really what God has for you? Is this really what your life should look like? Is this really Him? Is He really leading and guiding? Is He really in this deal?" And so we see Jesus go through that, and then we saw where Jesus called His first disciples. And we talked about how ridiculous, whenever you're reading in one account of the gospel, how it's just, "Hey, follow me," and we just think that they just dropped everything, and there's a little more to it than that. And so He calls His first disciples, and this morning, and then last week, we talked about something that was just still, as I've reflected this week over what took place with the temple, and that the temple, the Romans came in and destroyed the temple completely, and Judaism died just as Jesus had said that it was going to. And the Romans came in and they completely destroyed the temple. And so anything that was sacred, whether it was a sacred temple, we talked about how that was done away with because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And now the only thing that's left are sacred people. And that's it. And so whenever we talk about life being about people, it really is. That's Jesus' mission was for people. And we're going to talk about an account this morning that's significant. And it's more significant than I've ever realized. And that's the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well. When you grew up, oh, I'm on the wrong one here. Switch. All right. Have you ever had a difficult time in your life finding your people? Has anybody ever had that difficulty? I think all of us went through grade school or junior high or high school. And so I think there's been a time in our life where it's like, who are my people? We have a tendency to surround ourselves with people that are like us, right? We have that tendency. Another part of that is we have a tendency to surround ourselves with people who are like us. So not only do we want people to like us, we want people to be like us. And as Christians, we're some of the worst at this, is because we try to create these little subcultures. Has anybody ever been a part of a church that there were cliques or little subgroups within the church? And it's like, you kind of felt like, well, I'm not a part of that group, or I'm not a part of that. I've been a part of that on the side. Unfortunately, that was the group that other people wanted to be a part of. And I just remember, you know, in that setting, the attitude that I had of, you know, and even, you could even be a member of a certain church and kind of take pride in, hey, I'm a member of that church. And I'm sure nobody else has done that, but I've done that. I found myself in that position. And that's kind of what we want to do, is we want to create this little culture of people that are like us and people that like us. But Jesus wasn't like that, was he? He wasn't like that at all. And I think a lot of what he's seen today, I don't think he would like that. Though we're becoming supposedly more diverse, our society is becoming simultaneously more divided, more segmented, more polarized, more segregated than ever before. It's getting more difficult to disagree with someone and still maintain a relationship. I mean, if you don't believe me, and I hate it, so I'm not going to recommend anybody get on it, just get on Facebook. Just look at Facebook and look at the ridiculousness of Facebook. And it's like people will say things on Facebook that they wouldn't say face-to-face to other people. And people will comment on things that are said on Facebook that they probably wouldn't say that if they were face-to-face with each other. And it's easy to get with social media, it's easy to kind of get on your soapbox and take these stands, but you just look at everything's becoming more segmented. In 1976, which was a year before I was born, was a presidential election.
Trying to start something right.
So in 76, in the presidential election, a statistic was that about 40% of the population lived in a county that was won by a landslide vote. In the last presidential election, more than 80% of Americans lived in a county that it was a landslide vote. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we're kind of shifting around and we're finding our group of people and we're collecting in groups, and it's like this group doesn't agree with that group, and I watch Fox News and you watch CNN and I don't watch any of them. And so, you know, we have these subcultures and we're becoming more divided. And it's happening too in our churches. It's happening too, unfortunately, where it shouldn't be happening. It's happening in our churches. And I've seen it firsthand. I've been a part of it firsthand, and it's not pretty, and I don't like it. Jesus was very good at reaching out to everyone. And you see this, and we'll see this specifically in this account. And I just want to clarify one thing. Jesus was not politically correct. And if you don't believe me, just go read the gospel and look at his interaction with the Pharisees and Sadducees. He was not politically correct. He was not all-inclusive. You know, we've kind of got this attitude today of we need to be all-inclusive and we need to be tolerant. And I was telling Leah this morning, the world just almost gets it right. Just almost, but they just get it wrong enough that it's completely wrong. And so like we just all witnessed the horrific tragedy this past week of this school shooting. It's horrible. It's a tragedy. And of course, now we've got guys like Jimmy Kimmel, you know, acting in his late night show, crying in front of the camera, talking about gun control. And it's like, that's not our problem. We don't have a gun control problem in the United States, period. We do not. What we have is we have a heart problem. And Jesus came on the scene and he said, that's the problem. And we'll see in this account, there's a heart problem going on here, and Jesus recognizes it, and that's what he points to, and that's what he gets at. And so he's very good at doing this. So I just want to clarify that even though he reached out to everyone, he was not politically correct, he was not all-inclusive, and he was not tolerant. And but he was the perfect balance of grace and truth, and that's what made him so effective. And so we're going to read, and you can open your Bible if you have it, to John chapter 4. And we're going to look at this account of Jesus and this woman from Samaria at the well. We're going to start in verse 1. And it says, "Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again from Galilee." So we see once again the Pharisees are jealous. The Pharisees are upset because Jesus is baptizing more people than John now. And what's going on? And we're losing control. And you see this kind of jockeying for position going on here with the Pharisees. So Jesus left Judea, departed for Galilee. And the next verse says, "And he had to pass through Samaria." And I read that verse this week, and I thought, yeah, okay, that sounds logical enough. He had to pass through Samaria, but the whole fact of the matter is he didn't have to pass through Samaria. In fact, most Jewish people in this time, so they hated the Samaritans, okay? And the Jews did not like the Samaritans, and the Samaritans did not like the Jews, and so he had to pass through Samaria, and but he didn't. He did not have to pass through Samaria. And not everybody's going to be able to see this, and we looked it up, but Jesus was coming from up here at the Sea of Galilee. And it says that he had to go from here, and he was headed to Jerusalem, to Judea, and he had to go through Samaria. But at this time, that wasn't the case. What they would do, the Jews, they hated the Samaritans so much that they would skirt the Jordan River and take the longer route down to Jerusalem. to where they didn't have to encounter or deal with the Samaritans because they hated them. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, 12 noon. Okay, so man, I told Leah the last 2 weeks, I've really purposed to dig into the context and look at Scripture in the context of what was going on at that time. And as we talked about last week, I just had never heard that, about the Romans coming in and completely destroying the temple, and I just didn't know the history behind it. The same thing with this. So Israel at one point, and all of my CC friends here today will recognize part of this from their timeline, Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. There was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, okay? And I didn't know this. So the northern kingdom was overtaken in about 722 BC. It was overtaken by the Assyrians. The Assyrians came in, they overtook the northern kingdom of Jerusalem, they set up a new regime, and guess what happened? Since the Assyrians were in control, they brought a whole different culture of people in with them, and the Jews started intermarrying with these different cultures. So that's what was happening in the northern kingdom. Then in about 586 BC, about 120 years-ish later, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar took over and destroyed the southern kingdom. Okay? And so this is all setting up where this hatred comes between the Jews and the Samaritans. So this whole different group of people, the Babylonians, take over the southern kingdom. Well, they bring in a whole different culture of people. And the same thing happened in the southern portion of Israel. The Jews there started intermarrying with a whole different culture. Well then, so you have this division that's set up in Jerusalem. And they say, one account said that this dated back all the way to Joseph and his brothers. You know, Joseph, remember the story? Joseph's dad gave him the coat of many colors, and his brothers hated him. And they said that this really traces all the way back to there. But then it really got worse whenever Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. Then it even worsened whenever the Assyrians came in with a different culture than the Babylonians did. And so for about 550 to 600 years, you have this festering of this division between the north and southern portion of Israel. And so that leads us to 550 years of hatred and bitterness and disgruntledness. And that's where we find ourselves when Jesus is this account with the Samaritan woman. And they hated each other. They absolutely despised each other to the point that they would wear the trail down and they would literally go out of their way to where they didn't have to encounter a Samaritan. So Jesus, this is totally against the grain for him to even, number one, go through Samaria, but number two, to actually stop at a well and encounter this Samaritan woman was just completely off bounds. And so Jesus is sitting at the well, and it's about noon, and a woman from Samaria. Now, that's even crazier. He interacted not only with the Samaritan. First of all, he went the wrong direction. Second of all, he stopped. Then he talked to somebody, and of all things, it was a woman. And so he's just completely out of bounds here. So a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" So even she recognized, you should not be talking to me. You shouldn't even be here. What are you doing? And in parentheses, in the version of the Bible that I've copied over, it says, "For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." None. Where they'd go out of their way to where they didn't even have to interact with them. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. So she's just like, you're crazy. What are you saying? You're going to give me water? You don't even have a bucket. You're off your rocker. And plus, you shouldn't even be here. And Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, referring to the water in the well. But whoever drinks of the water that I give, that I will give him, will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. In verse 16, Jesus said to her, Go, call your husband and come here. So Jesus now is recognizing, he knows what's going on, but he's so good. He's gracious, and he stops, and he talks to her, and he's getting to know her, and he says, hey, go call your husband and come here. And the woman answered him. And I think she was probably a little embarrassed. She said, I have no husband. Jesus said, you're right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. So she's living with a guy. What you have said is true. The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. That was deep. So she recognizes now at this point, hey, something's different here. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. This is just crazy. Once again, we find Jesus pointing back to what He said last week, saying, no stone will be left unturned. The whole temple would be destroyed. And He's telling her that same thing here. That, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. He's once again pointing to, I'm here for a mission, and I've come to establish a new way, a new covenant, and a new command. And that's what Jesus, He's just so on mission. And even in this interaction with somebody that He shouldn't have been talking to, we just still find Him just so gracious to this woman. And I have to think that while He was interacting with her, she probably was pretty embarrassed, but He did it in a way that He was just gracious. I don't know of another way to say it. In verse 25 it says, the woman said to Him, I know that Messiah is coming, He who is called Christ. When He comes, He will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am He. And I think in that moment, probably for her, something shifted. Just like it did for us in this room at one point in time. Something just all of a sudden shifted where it's like, yeah, I'm dealing with something that I didn't recognize before. And I think she realized in this moment that, number one, He took time out of His schedule to stop down. Then He took time to talk to me. He didn't judge me. And you look, Jesus in that account never was judgmental. He knew what was going on. And she knew that He knew what was going on. But He didn't judge her. He didn't go out of His way to not have to have an encounter with this Samaritan woman. And in verse 27, just then His disciples came back. They marveled that it says they marveled that He was talking with a woman, but no one said, who do you seek, or why are you talking with her? So the woman left her water jar. So she had walked. There's no telling how far she had walked to go get water. And after this encounter with Jesus, she was so astonished and something had shifted that she left the water jar and she went back into town and told people, come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? So Jesus it's just striking to me. All this is going on, this history behind this, and these two groups of people hated each other. I mean, we're talking 550 years of hatred between these groups of people, and Jesus goes right through the middle of Samaria, stops at the well, encounters a woman, talks to her. Her whole life, I think, from this point forward, shifted. I think the significance of this is that it serves as a reminder for us we have a circle, and I think all of us recognize we have a circle of people that we like and people that are like us. And I think Jesus would call us to, hey, broaden your circle just a little. Just broaden your circle a little bit. And develop a curiosity for people. I think what happens is we see people and we judge them. I mean, has anybody ever been guilty of that? We see people, and Trisha does. That was good. But we do. We get into a setting. And I'll be at the gym or something, and I'll see a guy walk in, and he's just all tatted up.
See, we're judging because you're at the gym.
Yeah. and I'll see a guy, and he's just all tatted up. And what do we do in our mind? We're just like, man, he must be a loser. I mean, I'm just being honest. That's what we do. Instead of having a curiosity of, I wonder what his story is. I wonder what he's had to go through in life. I wonder what he has dealt with. I heard an account of basically, if you were to go to dinner, okay, and let's say you were to go and you knew that there was a new waiter, but it was somebody that you knew. Let's say it's a son of a friend, okay, and so you're purposefully going to go and sit in his section so that you can support him, so that you can tip him. And let's say that service is terrible. I mean, you order a Diet Coke and he brings you a root beer, and I mean, it's just awful. And so, but what do you do?
That restaurant too, huh?
But what do? I mean, you're gracious because guess what? It's somebody that you know, and you like that couple, and you like the son, so you're gracious. And then what do you do when it comes time to tip? Even though it was a struggle, you go ahead and tip big. Well, let's say you and the same group of people go to a restaurant and you have horrible service and you're disgruntled because you don't know the waiter, and quite frankly you don't care because the service is horrible. And as the service is terrible, the tip keeps going down. And so you leave a sorry tip and a little note that says, you're terrible, and you walk out.
Find a new job.
Yeah, find a new job. You've experienced that?
I've experienced that. The waiter.
But isn't it true? How because we know the other person, we're able to be gracious in that setting. But that other waiter, that's somebody, I mean, he's somebody's son. He's somebody's grandson. He's dealt with a whole different set of circumstances that you didn't even take time, or I didn't even take time to even recognize. And curiosity, what do I have to learn from this person or from this group of people? Curiosity causes you to ask questions and engage with people. Engage with sacred. We talked about how nothing's sacred except for people. I've told you before, the only two things we get to take out of this lifetime. There's only two things we get to take out of this life. Our history with God and our relationship with other people. That's it. Nothing else do we get to take out of this life. And so curiosity causes us to engage, causes us to take a step back, and rather than judge, causes us to ask questions of what's their story? Instead of the other attitude we can have is to be arrogant and not ask questions and just judge. Curiosity is an exercise of humility. And so I just want to encourage us. Jesus gave us a great example. And the Gospels record a great example of Jesus stepping into a situation that was totally out of the norm for this. And he engaged. He questioned. He was willing to stop down and take the time. Jesus was the perfect balance of grace and truth. And he would say to you and me, come to me and learn, and I will teach you how to live freely and lightly. Your view of God will be as small as the size of your table, or as small as the size of your circle. or put another way, will be as small as the size of your circle of influence. And so I'm just going to encourage us to just broaden a little bit. When we see somebody, don't be so quick to judge. Take time out to just talk. I told Leah this week, I didn't spend the whole week in the gym, but I was in the gym, and I'd seen this guy for the last year, the same guy, and we'd always kind of, wave, but we both had our headphones in, and we'd kind of wave and acknowledge that the other one was there. But today, earlier this week, we both kind of looked at each other and we kind of laughed, and we took our headphones out and we stopped down and talked to each other. Well, what I found was, man, he's got a great family, a young family in Abilene, and we just connected. But it's like we had to take time to, rather than just go on about our business, to take our headphones out and engage. And I told Leah I was so thankful that I did, because, you just never know what tomorrow holds. And so just take time. Take time, make time, and I think this is just a great story, another story where Jesus just gives us an example of, hey, don't be normal. Just engage people and look at people as though they're sacred. And so I'm going to leave us with that this week. And you can read this account, read it again in John chapter 4, and just the significance of it. Jesus shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have been talking to her. And I just think it's so amazing that he stopped down and he took the time. And I think we should too. So I'll pray for us and pray for lunch, and we'll be finished. God, thank you for today. Thank you for Jesus and just his example to us. And God, thank you that he demonstrated just being what it looks like to be the perfect balance of grace and truth. And God, we just ask that through this encounter with a woman at the well, God, that we would just be encouraged this week to go out of our way and just engage with people that we see, people that we don't know, and help us to broaden our circle. And God, help us to be better influencers to those around us. Father, I thank you for each family here, and I thank you for this church, and just ask that you would continue to grow us and lead us and guide us. And God, thank you for lunch, and thank you for the opportunity to fellowship and to be together and build community. And bless our week ahead. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.